empathy for each individual is one of the crucial aspects of leading. Because if you can understand how each person is in their role, but also how they're feeling, then you can tailor your approach to working with them to maximize the output for both them personally, but the group. That was my biggest impact, or that's how I developed, I think, that crucial skill of leadership. Hello and welcome to this episode of Confessions of a B2B Entrepreneur. And today we have an interview with me, very ego-driven, I know. And the thing or the interesting part about this interview is we don't talk about marketing or really entrepreneurship at all. We just cover things around management, leadership, remote, culture, organizational effectiveness, which is actually something that I'm getting more and more passionate about, and also something that I'm thinking is more and more important for any B2B entrepreneur. And so massive shout out to Sophie Wade, who was an incredible interviewer for this interview. She is clearly A, knowledgeable, but B, very passionate about this stuff. So it makes it very easy for me to share any thoughts I have on it. So let's jump into that now. So thanks to Sophie. And let me know if you like this. Ping me a DM on Twitter or LinkedIn at TomHunt.io or Tom Hunt on LinkedIn. The links will be in the show notes if you have any questions about this or anything related to this podcast, or actually anything related to B2B or the topics we discuss in this episode. Let's jump into this right now.
One of the core principles of the new world of work. We are experiencing a tsunami of change. And being proactive, you can ride this well instead of being buffeted around. There are new realities, options, and opportunities. There are new methods and metrics. There are different guardrails and signposts, and you need to determine and decide what works for you and your team as a leader, coach, and catalyst, manager, and guide. What is best for your team and company? What proactive and supportive environment are you co-creating? What new rules of engagement are emerging? How are you motivating and measuring your team? What intention are you bringing to your unit or organization to lead, learn, and grow every day as you continue to define and refine the contours of what's ahead? I'm delighted to be talking to Tom Hunt, founder and CEO of Fame, that builds the world's most profitable B2B podcasts. Tom is the host of the popular podcast Confessions of a B2B Marketer. Tom is an intentional leader and manager, and his company was fully remote well before the pandemic. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am very good. I'm very excited about this discussion.
Me too. From one London to another. I'm a Londoner in New York, and you're a Londoner. And where are you right now?
Currently in Rome, one of the most romantic cities in the world.
My favorite city on the planet, actually.
For real?
Yeah.
Have you read the book Eat, Pray, Love?
I have not.
Okay, it's I might get this wrong, but the lady, the author, is an executive, and she takes a year off to travel to 3 different places. The first is Eat, which is Rome. And then she moves on to India, which is Pray, and then Love, which is Bali. But her description, she's an incredible writer, her description of Rome is one of the reasons why we decided to come here.
Oh, okay. Nice. And has it lived up to expectations so far?
So 1 week in, yes, it has.
Wonderful. That's kind of starting at the end. Now I go back to the beginning. What did you study?
Chemistry.
I did see that. Oh my goodness. So why? You went into consulting after studying chemistry. What gives?
Well, chemistry was because I think I was just good at it. Like my mind was like more logical, and I think I was just found it quite easy. So I decided to do that for uni. Realized that I'm not the type of person that should be like in a lab doing really detailed work from while I was doing the master's project. So then I was like, I'm going to go and earn some money or try and earn some money. So I spent 4 years consulting, managing large outsourcing projects, realized that I'm not very good at being employed.
That's a really interesting experience because you weren't doing typical consulting. You were working on outsourcing projects, which is really interesting because of the type of work you were doing. How did you gravitate towards that? Because for me, those kind of project management skills, those organizational skills, show a particular type of mind, which I think is relevant later as you take this entrepreneurial journey.
Oh, yeah. So many things I learned in those 4 years have really helped me today. I think I got into the outsourcing thing purely because of luck. There was this one director who I got on well with in the onboarding process of the first consulting company. He was tasked by the lead of the UK, lead of our area in the business, to improve gross margin through the use of the Global Talent Hub, which was this team in India. And so he wanted a analyst or young person to help him somehow I got that role and then worked with him on that for a long time. And then probably because of that experience, I got put on a large outsourcing project with Vodafone, with Accenture when I went there. So more luck, I think, but that experience and the skills I generated by doing that have basically been very instrumental in what we do today.
You then founded a company right after leaving Accenture. What provided the impetus for leaving a consulting company to start your own business? That's not the normal path.
During the 4 years, I realized that I'm not good at being employed. I can't really be employed. Even today, if anybody tells me like what to do, something inside me just like tenses up. It's really hard in relationships. And so I left, and I can't code, but I'm really interested in the internet. So I need to learn how to sell stuff, basically how to do online marketing. So from 2013 to today, I've spent like my whole life working out how to sell stuff online. So what I decided to do was take the outsourcing experience, Accenture, very big outsourcing. And so it had kind of worked with the story to go and find other startups in London and then essentially sell them a team that I was building in the Philippines.
The whole point about learning how to sell online, the bigger reason was so that you could have your own business and not have to work for anybody else.
Yeah, so I could like live without having a job.
I think you do have a job. You may not be working for somebody else. Okay. Your first business was connecting entrepreneurs with VAs. And where did that idea come from? That was early on, between 2015 and 2017.
Yeah, this was the first one. It came out of seeing the value of outsourcing for these large companies, probably reading Tim Ferriss's book, 4 Hour Workweek. And then I think just liking the idea of having an assistant. I think it's quite like an ego thing. And I think I just got one straight away and I really liked it. And so that was a plan. I was like ex-Accenture, now taking the Accenture outsourcing secrets and helping startups in London hire remote talent.
Got it. And then you sold that business. And then you were COO for a company. Okay, so that was being an employee. So I'm sure you weren't very happy in that one.
Didn't work well.
Along the next steps of your journey, what were you then learning for yourself about how you wanted to set yourself up, what business you wanted to do? Because it does seem that you've been quite purposeful in the different aspects that you've been learning and very deliberate in the steps that you've taken.
That's an interesting observation. I think that in terms of learning and steps, I bias towards the thing that I enjoy and I'm good at, which is communication, influence, and marketing. And so there've actually been, and you won't find this on LinkedIn, but there's been like maybe 15 different ventures since 2013 to today. All of them have some kind of connection to the internet and marketing. You mentioned I sold that first company, but it was for tens of thousands of dollars. And so for the 2 years of 12-hour days, not a great hourly rate. So I don't know if it was that pre-thought out, but I just biased myself to doing the thing that I knew that I was good at and that I enjoyed doing the most, which is really just learning how to sell things on the internet.
In addition to these other elements that you learned, you then started angel investing. What were you looking for, or what did you find in others that you were prepared to back them?
Good question. I think with the angel investing stuff, the thing that I was looking for most was founder resilience. So I had this founder or founder failed before and then kept going. The reason for that is because at that early stage, the chances that the thing that they're currently working on will be a thing that gets to a scale where I could have a return on this money I'm giving them is quite low. And so the ability to fail or pivot or tweak things and then go forward, I think is probably the most important at that very early stage. So the way you can find that out is hopefully you can see it before, like without even speaking to them by looking at their back history. But then of course you can speak to them and ask them questions about times they failed. Now, the default answer when you ask founders about that is that they don't want to tell you that they failed. So you have to try and dig in a bit.
Right. So what generated the idea for Fame?
I took a brief hiatus of the decade of entrepreneurship, because I needed money in 2018. It was actually a company I invested in that I was good friends with the founder. And so I basically went to be the head of demand generation, basically head of marketing for a year. I only lasted a year, as we know. And so during that time, we started a podcast, and long story short, it was very good for them. So I left and they became the first client of Fame. And then all Fame is us just tweaking and improving that and implementing it for other companies.
what's your vision for Fame? The podcast is called Confessions of a B2B Marketer. And it's been very interesting for me how you talk about it in the podcast. You have, since November 22, been sharing your income and sharing the growth. I didn't listen to all of them, but how not only customers or people you know or business acquaintances have been doing and what lessons they have, but also for yourself. Some of these are definitely confessions, and that transparency is revealing yourself, opening up your company, which I find very interesting for your clients. Your podcast is very closely connected with Fame, who is serving your clients, and also your employees. So I'd love you to share a bit about that.
Yeah, I think the obvious answer to being transparent is it can help get attention. Now, that obviously only works if the people that are interested in you talking about how much revenue you're making could also be good customers. Now, there is a slight overlap, not the ideal overlap. Our ideal customers are like B2B marketing directors of large SaaS companies, not smaller, not like entrepreneurs. So there is that benefit. I actually think the bigger benefit, though, is for me and my learning and development. Having to, because so the Income Report podcast is like 20 minutes long or whatever, but I have to spend about an hour thinking, going back through the numbers, understanding my learnings, distilling the learnings, working out how to communicate the learnings. And so that is probably the biggest benefit, I think, is going through the process to clarify my understanding. The best way to learn is to teach, in my opinion. And so that's part of that. There's some ego benefit. I think I am somewhat ego-driven. I want to prove to everybody how good I am. And so announcing numbers obviously helps with that. And then the final, more selfless reason is I have learned a lot from people that share what they've done, what they've learned. And for me, the best content is always the stuff that's backed up by real numbers. And so there's a little bit of giving back, I think. So those are the reasons why we do it. But I'm glad that you found it interesting.
Very much so, because that kind of transparency for private companies is very rare. So looking at the growth that you've had for Fame, and it's not about Fame, it's more about how you've approached it and how you've approached being a leader and growing. You've been growing fast, and you are leading an entirely distributed company, or is it mostly distributed?
100% distributed.
So you've been a leader in various organizations, employed as you did not want to be, but you have been leading teams who have been co-located. How has that been going from a leader of co-located teams to a leader of fully distributed teams and a fully distributed company?
Yeah, I think the bulk of the previous experience of co-located management actually comes from Starbucks. I was a supervisor at Starbucks in Chippenham, where I grew up. And what did I learn from that experience? I feel like, you mentioned this before we started recording, like empathy for each individual is one of the crucial aspects of leading. Because if you can understand how each person is in their role, but also how they're feeling, then you can tailor your approach to working with them to maximize the output for both them personally, but the group. And so that was my biggest impact, or that's how I developed, I think, that crucial skill of leadership. And I guess that is just a set, like, I still have to do that with a distributed team. I think it probably is just a bit harder because you have less exposure. On a shift in Starbucks, you're working with someone for 6 hours. During a whole day of remote work, maybe you're only on a call with somebody for 30 minutes. So I think that is a challenge. I don't think I have any like juicy insights as to how I've been able to do that. If you spend a lot of time on calls and then I guess get really good at like seeing how people are feeling through tonality, face language, because it isn't really body language. You can eventually just have to tailor your approach based on how you think they are on a video call, not in person.
Agreed. I'm always advising listen to voices and intonation and be looking at emails and texts and what channel people are using, because there's also a lot of information and an email looks rushed off or a text is not the same as it normally is. Hang a second. Well, Tom wrote this in a different way. Looking at all those signals, but a lot of different signals. Do you get together quite often? I've interviewed Chase Warrington from Doist. They, as a fully distributed company, now spend more time and effort every month because they also have very few meetings and calls every week. And so it has to be very purposeful. Do you try and get people together? You have like 35 FTEs now? Is that right?
71.
71. So you're going fast. Have you, over the last year or so, brought people together when you can in person? Or how do you try and work on that culture? Because that was one of the things that you'd said in the February income report was that you were working incrementally on culture, and what are you doing with that?
Yeah, quickly on that, I like to call it metadata. So it's not the thing that's being said, but it's how it's being fed. Whether it's on a call, Slack message, email, you're totally right. And I haven't really thought about it too much, but there's almost more interesting information in how something's being said as to what's being said. Do they use an emoji? Is there spelling mistakes? What's their voice tonality? So yeah, that is an absolutely really good point. Getting together in person, we at the moment meet. So we have a big chunk of the team in the UK, 40%, a big chunk of the team in the Philippines, 40%, and the remaining 20% are distributed. So right now we only meet in person like an organized team once per year around Christmas time. And it's like a UK in one place, Philippines team in the other place. And then actually we don't have anything for the distributed team. So obviously we need to work on this. What I will say is that is an incredible time. You can't really explain the feeling you get when you meet these people in person and like the progress you can make with the relationships and the feeling afterwards. And so I think there is a case for doing that more frequently. I think the question is, do we invest more money into it, right? Because getting the whole team together once a year or more than once a year is going to like double the cost of that. And so that's a question that I have to think about. I don't have the answer yet. But to your next point about building the culture, that massively helps the in-person stuff. But obviously that's only like 2 days out of the rest of the year. So I think there are a few things we do relatively well remotely that I can share on culture building. First and most important, I think, is something called Values Awards. I stole this from, I think they have it at Starbucks and Accenture, where if anybody sees anybody else in the business do something that aligns with one of our 4 values, they can give a Fame Values Award, which is basically a $50 cash bonus for doing that. And so that happens every week. And so then in the weekly meeting we have on Friday, we announce all the FVAs saying what the person did and what value that aligns with. So it's a constant reminder of the values. That's one.
And what are your values, if I might ask?
Client is number one. So put the client first. Action, bias, like do something so we can learn. Operational excellence, very important in a service company. And then growth obsessed, both client podcasts, you as a person and the business.
Got it.
So I think that is probably maybe the most impactful thing we do for culture remotely. The next one I think is good is on so we have 2 team meetings every week, 30 minutes, 12 p.m. Monday, 12 p.m. Friday. On the Monday one, it's a random question and everyone has to answer that. So the bulk of the meeting is somebody answering the question and it can be really about anything. The Friday one is weekly wins. So it's just a magical time for any remote business. So everyone just says what their win is for the week. So I think those two help like for people to like get to know each other and to help build the culture.
And that's everybody, both of those?
We had to split out. So Monday is everybody, but for the Friday one, we split it out because it was taking too long. So it's UK, Philippines, and the rest of the world.
The reason that you came to my attention, as you know, is that I picked up on a post. You had shared how you had interacted with one of your employees who'd wanted to take their vacation and you'd approved it. You didn't ask any questions. Your point about your post was effectively they're adults. The people who work for the company, they're adults, which is why I asked about the company values, because there wasn't really anything that showed up in that. All those things were very much client-focused and business-driven. It wasn't about valuing employees or anything with that regard. How do you, when you're hiring somebody, they obviously know that they're going to be working for a fully remote company. There are particular people who are or are not interested in working for a fully remote company. How do you work out if this person is the right fit? They are going to be able to deliver. They are going to be happy. They're going to be client-focused and be responsible as adults to do the right thing for the company and for themselves so that they can be successful.
Yeah, the interview technique that I've always used comes from a book called Top Grading. And the theory behind the technique is that past performance is the best indicator of future success. And the theory is basically you have the values or the criteria that you want to assess for, and then you just ask detailed questions about previous work history. And we'll go through the questions in a second, and then scan for answers that suggest the person will behave like this or can do these things.
Okay.
So basically, we pick between 2 and 3 previous work histories and then go through the following questions. First, like you get them to summarize what they did and what the role was. Then ask what they like about it, what they disliked about it, what their manager would say their greatest strengths were, and what their manager would say their greatest drawbacks or improvement points were. And then repeat that for 1 or 2 more work histories. And so the way we train our team to hire for, we basically have a very defined process for this one role that's very important for us. So we trained our team how to hire for this role. is that we say, ask those questions, scan for the 4 values we just mentioned, along with 3 other criteria that we think are important for this specific role. And then each interviewer assesses, and then we discuss and decide whether we think this person can do it.
Interesting. Has Fame always been fully distributed?
Yeah, so we formed the company before COVID and we were fully remote before then.
That answers my question in terms of how do you know that you can hire for remote, but if you've been doing that for a while. Do you consider the possibility of adding a collaboration space or a place for people to get together if you have so many people in the Philippines and in the UK? I'm just curious because everybody's working out their own solution, right? There are companies that have no offices, but collaboration spaces. There's hybrid. What is the office for? Or what are co-located spaces beneficial for? So I'm just curious if that is ever on your radar or if people have asked for it or consider it. Just interested in terms of the evolution of your company.
People have asked for it. We've considered it, but we've declined it or have decided not to do it. I think because it's very important for the experience of the company to be completely consistent for everybody. And so, yes, we could have a co-working space in London or in Edinburgh and people would go there, but then those people are going to have a different experience than somebody who's working in Russia, for example. And so any kind of in-person centralized campaign is going to equally benefit some people over the others. So what we have decided is that if any team member, and team members, another word for employee, meets another team member in person, whether they're doing work or not, they get a small allowance for that meeting to be spent on anything. So that's like a decentralized campaign that promotes in-person interaction, which then has benefits for the company and for the individual.
I like that. How do you enable people to hold themselves accountable? Because some people who want to work remotely are not great at it and they need some better management or need this empathetic management, which understands that somebody needs more milestones, the other person doesn't. They're great without that. How do you help support managers and employees be as successful as they possibly can, having chosen distributed work? They may be amazing at it, and they may be particularly younger employees who are coming into the workplace and who need perhaps more, not structures, but frameworks to work within.
I think we're lucky in that business is quite processified. Not a word, but you know what I mean. We have this so we have this one thing that we have to execute for our clients. And so it's quite easy to measure outputs. So we're fortunate in that.
Right.
If you took another service business, let's say McKinsey, where each project may be different and there's super complex problems, then maybe it's going to be harder to manage that. But we have this one process. And so this enables us to quite easily see if somebody is performing or not.
Got it. Yeah.
Because everything's so well defined. And I would say quite simple. We just do this one thing for clients. So that's the first thing. Now, if you are measuring wholly on outputs or primarily on outputs, then in order for you to have an effective business, you have to have strong performance management. Because if you measure on outputs, not inputs, but then you don't have strong performance management, if somebody doesn't perform, keeps not performing, your business is going to die. We're lucky because we can measure on outputs, but we're only able to keep doing that because we have strong performance management, which we don't view as like a process in which we try to fire somebody. It's a process in which we're looking to support someone to perform better. And if they can't, then we part ways. So it's like we like to see it as a positive process, but not necessarily a negative one.
My next question then becomes, in that performance management, what are the elements of it? Because leadership is much more about frequent check-ins because things are changing so much, to be able to course correct as you've seen what works for different people, obviously, or measuring in the same kind of way.
First thing I'll say is like wholly within our interests as a company to train people effectively to do their jobs, but also manage people doing their jobs. So, because that means people are going to be more engaged, they're going to stay for longer. It also means we can bring people on that have less experience and add value to that person like throughout their career journey. So that is like the first thing is that, yes, we're output driven and we have strong performance management, but we also will support people. Let's actually get into the actual things we do to manage and train people. So obviously every team member has a manager. We have one role, which is the account manager, which is like the most crucial, probably can't say the most important, but a crucial role for us. So I'll just use that as an example. So every account manager reports into an account director. Every account manager will have what we call a daily briefing, which is either once per day or can be reduced to 3 times per week. And then for 10 to 15 minute check-in where the account manager can ask the account director any questions they have. So that's like the first point of call. We then have the peer group of account managers. It's manifested in a Slack channel where they can, instead of going to their manager, they can go to the other account managers, which I think is quite useful.
Yes.
Then on the weekly basis, we have what's called AM training or account manager training, where someone else in the business trains the account managers on some aspect of the process or some aspect of life or business. So I've done trainings, for example, on like career progression, how you can progress in your career. The next stage or the next kind of type of meeting is what we call the monthly chat. So this is between the manager and the managee, which is the review of basically 3 questions. What's gone well this month? What's gone not so well? And what do you want to learn / do more of? And then we've recently added in, how can I be a better manager for you? So that's like the main management check-in. And then if at any stage we feel like this person isn't performing, then they would go into the performance management process, which is, it's like warning, PIP stage 1, 2, final warning, go through 4 stages. But it's positioned as like, this is how we need to perform better. It's not negative. I think that is pretty much everything on the management side. The final thing I'll say is that the management philosophy we subscribe to is from the book High Output Management by the Intel founder, Andy Grove. In my opinion, the best management book ever. And so a big chunk of the management training we give for all managers is directly derived from that book.
Okay, interesting. I looked at some of the profiles on the website. A few people have put what their role is. Basically, it's just a name. There's no picture, which spoke to me about being a very flat organization. There'll be a huge percentage of people who are both Gen Zs and millennials. I know for younger folks, the upskilling is really important, the learning, the development. In a very flat organization, that isn't that easy. How do you help retain people? They're very keen to learn and feel they need to learn so that they'll stay within your organization.
I think it's through the mechanisms I shared in the last question, right? So they have an account director who has proven that they have the ability to do the role that they speak with every day or every other day that can show them how to do stuff. And then we have this weekly training session on something to do with the role run by someone else in the team. And then there's like the peer group that they join of account managers where they can learn directly from each other if they want. What we say to every account manager that joins is that the onboarding process they go through is the best it's ever been, because every time somebody goes through it, we get feedback and we can improve. Like a big reason that I think we've been able to succeed is by taking people that have little to no experience and then putting them through this process to enable them to do what we do.
Okay, nice.
So the onboarding process is like a key value add driver for our company. And it is
interesting,
evolving and improving every time. So that ideally gets people to a good footing and then they go through the other things we just mentioned.
So come into this company and we will train you and upskill you from day 0. You can come in with very little expertise and we'll take you on a long journey. Interesting.
A great example of this, there's a guy called Michael who currently is the head of growth, joined 2 to 3 years ago as an account manager. We've never hired anybody for a non-entry level role. So everyone will come in as a project manager or an account manager. So Michael came in as an account manager, 0 experience in podcasts, 0 experience in marketing, went from account manager to account director, maybe 9 months, and then went from account director to head of growth. So he runs our sales and marketing function now, despite having 0 experience in these things. Now, like massive credit to both Michael and a lady called Alexandra, who was his manager up until now, where I'm now his manager. And so, yeah, Michael is a success story. But yeah, that's how we like to, that's how I think one of the reasons, and this, I've never read this anywhere else, is a great, or I think one way to destroy culture is to bring in people from the outside that don't fit. Now, obviously, that is not a risk if you don't do that. Or you're able to mitigate the risk by only bringing in entry-level people, because you're bringing people into the workplace that, I could probably use a better word, but can be molded into your culture. You know, if you bring on someone who's much more experienced and skilled, they bring their own. So I think it's just harder to get that right if they're more experienced.
And do you find that there are people who just say, yes, great, I've learned so much, I've gone on this journey, and thank you very much for all the stuff that I've learned, and now I want to learn something else? How do you actually approach that conversation, if I may?
I say to everybody that joins, our view on progression is that if you have something that you want to learn and do, and you've mastered your current role, the role that you're born for, and there's a business need for that thing, then you can do it. You just have to find the person who's going to replace you so you can move on. And that's something I learned. I don't know. I think I picked that up from the corporate world somewhere. And I picked it up in the negative, in that there was quite a few times where I was like, I want to go and do this. Can I do it? Maybe I hadn't mastered my existing roles, so it's totally fair enough.
Right.
But that's what I hated. And so this is why I wanted to create a workplace like this. So if they master the current role and there's a business need and they can find someone to replace them, then there's no reason why somebody shouldn't be able to progress.
What haven't I asked you that I should have done?
So we covered the culture stuff. I did actually have some notes. I would say the bulk of my management philosophy is taken from one single author. The person, I'm sure you read the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, or maybe
I
heard
have
that
not.
book. Okay.
Yes, I have.
Very famous team building book. It's great, but it actually isn't his best work. He has 17 business books, and there's 2 or 3 others that basically are my philosophy. I'll just share what I've learned from one of them because it's been the most impactful. It's called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. That's the author. And he basically says the businesses thrive when the leadership team can walk through these 4 steps. First, get cohesion in the leadership team, e.g. the leadership team are all aligned. There's no mixed messages coming from different leaders. Everybody understands the goals and is working towards them. That's step 1. Step 2 is create clarity. So where's the organization going? How are we going to get there? Step 3 is communicate that clarity. Step 4 is just repeat that clarity or reinforce the clarity. So really he calls the CEO, the CRO, e.g. the Chief Reminding Officer. Your job is just to create, communicate and reinforce the clarity. And so that is, I think, one of the most impactful or responsible reasons for how we built a good culture is moving through those 4 steps.
For me, it does sound very much like some of the core elements that you thread through without necessarily using the word empathy are very much about that understanding. All these coaching, these check-in, these peer, close communication and interaction, which is really focused on helping people understand each other and help them do their best work and align them with their strengths and skills and what they enjoy doing. What would you recommend for a leader of a fully distributed company or fully distributed team? Because you've obviously spent a lot of time very thoughtfully thinking about leadership for that particular landscape, dealing with people who are not co-located at all. What's the biggest difference?
That's a good question. I think that, as we discussed before, your face time with your team is maybe 5% versus to 10% of what it would be if you were co-located. And so my biggest piece of advice would probably be that is the time in which you have to be really good at either conveying or collecting information. And so it's to be aware of that and use that time really wisely to both collect information about how one or more people are feeling or doing, and then also use that time really wisely to convey information that can help improve people's work lives. That's probably the biggest thing, is don't take those meetings for granted. Everyone hates remote meetings and Zoom calls, right? But if you're remote, that's where you have to do your best work as a leader.
Great point. Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciated your time today. You've shared a great journey and all that you've learned along the way, and the learning journey that you're still on, leading and growing a distributed team, which is fantastic. I love it. Thank you very much.
Sophie, awesome interviewing skills. I listened to a few podcast episodes. You've done a really good job of pulling out some wisdom that I have.
Thanks again so much to Tom Hunt, founder and CEO of Fame. You can follow Tom on LinkedIn and X and Instagram at TomHuntIO, TomHuntIO. You can also go to Fame's website, fame.so, and listen to Tom's podcast, Confessions of the B2B Marketer.